All right, ladies and gentlemen, what I would like to go over is just a little bit of the visual research that I use that helped me design my teacher sample. Excuse me, my teacher sample for our protest postcard. As I've shown in class, and as you guys are seeing here, I love to create a Pinterest page for any project that I'm starting. Since this is for 2D Studio Workshop, the Mr. Lauer Lauer account has a lot of different projects in here. I've been starting to do some more research for our next unit, which is mixed media. My apologies. But as you can see, prior to that, I was doing some research on printmaking and what kind of imagery might be worthwhile to do a printmake project prior to me settling on going back to the protest posters, but doing it as a protest postcard, um, as we've been working on now for just over 2.5 weeks. That said, I do want to remind you guys that the visual research is what can show up in your process journals. It can show up as an address to a Pinterest page or an Instagram account or screenshots of the images you found. You can also copy and paste images into a Google Doc or a Google Word um, document, Google Slides or Google Word. My apologies. So as you can see, I've collected a lot of different images that really talk about protests. And one of the biggest things that I noticed was just the idea of fighting against oppression and fighting against violence in many different forms. If that is domestic violence, if that is racial injustice, if that is class inequalities, but that idea of a struggle of some sort. And as a art teacher, I'm all about using art over violence. And so I was really struck by Shepard Fairey's piece, "Make Art Not War." It's a piece that I saw way back in 2005, I believe, 2005, 13 years ago. My nephew's 13. A couple days before he was born, my best friend and I hopped in the car and we drove out to the West Coast. I was going to start an art internship at a gallery in Los Angeles. So my best friend and I drove out there. And the reason I'm telling you this silly little anecdote is because when we landed in Seattle, Washington, at Pike's Place, which is a giant market on the seaboard in Seattle, yeah, I went into a small bookshop there across the street from the original Starbucks, which I believe is no longer the original Starbucks. They've remodeled it. But anyways, long-winded story. Sorry for my tangents. I saw this artwork on a T-shirt and a poster in that shop. I don't know how old it was at that time, but it was 13 years ago. So whatever, 2007 maybe. Um, yeah, I really liked it then. I liked it now, and so when I rediscovered it doing research for this project, I really wanted to borrow that "Make Art Not War," as well as looking at other pieces by Shepard Fairey, which hopefully some of you have done. He's big in his brand of Obey, which is counterproductive because it's meant to go against corporate overlords and being like everyone else, except he's made his own brand of Obey, and that's how he goes. But I didn't just study Shepard Fairey, as I mentioned. I did look into the artwork of Emory Douglas, as we've all studied, as well as other works from other people. But I really kind of was struck by this idea of making art not war, and that was the theme I wanted to go with, just to kind of use art to promote discussion and dialogue and not violence. The other inspiration that I had that I'd like to go into is a new video game that my youngest son had been researching, that he ended up saving up his money and buying, called Cuphead, The Adventures of Cuphead, something like that. But the artist that made that really concentrated on bringing to life cartoons that they grew up with from the 1930s and 40s, some of the earliest art styles or animations that were out there. And I was really drawn to a lot of the artwork and the stylings that they did uh, back then, that they did to create cartoons. And then this particular video game company out of Canada, two buddies got together and said, "We're just going to make our own video game. It's going to be based in this kind of 1930s style." Here's a screenshot from it. Excuse me, where you're on a level and Cuphead and Mugman, I think, are fighting against this Medusa-esque sea creature. But it's just nuts. But some of the original ideas and sketches just really drew me. I actually asked my brother for Christmas to buy me. They have a book about the art of Cuphead, and I've watched a couple of YouTube videos now about the designers and how they came up with some of these ideas. So I was really drawn to their style, and so I started going through and I started looking at what I liked, and I liked the animation style for the bodies, and then I tried to turn it into my own original design, which I cannot remember if I have in my drive or not, but I think I do. Nonetheless, you guys have seen it over and over again in many other things that I have done. But let's go look in the recent. Let's see if I have the artwork still in here. And of course, it's not going to be under recent because I didn't look at it recently. Oh well. I did show it to you guys in class. I just wanted to end my video about visual research with it. And clearly, I do not know how far deep into here I had. Oh, there it is. Hey, we found it. So, oh, there's some more of my visual research. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about visual research as we start to get into it. So here is the drawing I did, the full size in my sketchbook. I did photograph it and then use the computer to kind of shrink it down to the size I needed so that I could draw it and put it on my plate. But here's the final draft of what I ideally thought it would look like. Doesn't mean that's what it's going to end up like. As mentioned, I really started digging the styles of course, it's not going away. I started digging the styles of these artists and illustrators that worked on the video game. And a lot of the video game was hand illustrated and then put in the computer and digitized. So I just want to show you some of the stuff that inspired me for this particular project. As mentioned, some of these sketches that they worked on and that kind of animation style. I was really digging the body language, that kind of exaggerated motion as things go out. Was some of the visual research I did before starting to sketch. Excuse me, sorry. I should have really prepared this ahead of time. I'm sorry, guys. Just dragging on my video. But let's go back and we'll see if it'll let me just kind of advance between these slides. So here's another one. It's one of the villains, that kind of simplified style, those kind of really big old style shoes. The bow tie, obviously, a little bit more dressed up since I wear bow ties most every day in class. I had found this villain that had a beard, and I thought, oh, it's winter. I'm growing out my beard. I'm going to go that route with the beard, although I'm not some kind of weird pirate with a giant nose. So I skipped that and kind of kept drawing myself with the hair and with the beard. I took the bodies from here and the idea of that paintbrush. So I really used inspiration from holding up the paintbrush in the air and kind of talking about making art, not war, inspired me. And then I think there's 3 or 4 more images from there. The body and the dancing, that kind of movement that they have in their animation. Here's obviously Shepard Fairey's piece of Make Art Not War that I first saw in a bookshop in Seattle. As mentioned earlier, here's some more kind of styles from that era. Here is another picture of the pirate, and I didn't know if I wanted to go with that kind of big body design or not. Kind of reminds me of Bluto, who was the bad guy of Popeye. If you guys have ever seen Popeye cartoons? It was one of my dad's favorite cartoons. He was a kid back in the baby boomers. There is a quick drawing that I had done of myself, kind of sketched out, and I photographed that and sent it in. And then I think this is the last bit of inspiration, and now I've kind of moved it in my file. But last couple things that I did, these are what we would consider a clipping file. Things that I've clipped and put into my artwork that I was inspired by. This being the last bit, that kind of, hey, do I want to be laid back? That body language of like, hey man, let's have peace. But I ended up going with something a little bit more dynamic, but this is just more of that art style and that simplicity of the 3-fingered or 4-fingered kind of Simpson-y characters. So that's the end of my clip, ladies and gentlemen, about building a process portfolio, being inspired by some visual research and other artists that you are studying this unit. I hope it helps. Now we proof print. Ladies and gentlemen, a proof print is a test. It is just to proof it to see what it looks like and see how well we carved and how well we inked. Think of it in terms of English class when you're asked to proofread your writing. So you guys are going to use your tool that we got in our kits. You guys will remove the rubber stamp that was on it. Now we're going to use this end as a brayer. Hopefully you guys won't have too much goo on it like I do. If you do, you can just try to wipe that off with a cleaner, maybe with soap and water. But since I'm already videotaping, I'm going to leave mine on. What you'll do next is take your plate that you have now inked, and you'll carefully lay it in a page in your sketchbook. Try not to move it. Take that brayer, and you can either stamp. Ooh, I moved my plate. Yeah, that's not so good with that being sticky. If it wasn't sticky though, you'd be able to rub with it. I'll use this empty container. Maybe it's not so good with rubbing either. There we go. What you're meant to do with this, sorry, it's meant to be a burnisher. You're meant to burnish and be able to rub all on here. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to very carefully push down and use it as a stamp. Since we're not in the classroom, we don't have a press, I'm just going to use this. This is one of the major techniques that you guys are going to need to perfect over the course of making multiple prints until you get a print that you're happy with. So let's see our proof print, shall we? This is called pulling a print, although traditionally when it comes out of a press, you'd be pulling the paper off of the ink pad. So that is my proof print. It is not the best. What traditionally happens is that the first layer of ink really just starts to go into the rubber, so you want to do a second proof print with a second layer of ink. So now that we have our ink pad full of ink and we've done one first proof print, we'll go back in with our ink and we'll reapply it. As we said in the previous clip, we want to try to make a nice thin layer. But now that the linoleum plate is covered in ink, hopefully this second print will come out a little bit nicer. More often than not, your first pull of a print is not going to come out well because the ink is just getting used to being on the rubber. So now that we've printed it once, this second print should come out much nicer. Remember, as I said in the last clip, apply it thin. Notice how I'm not dipping it in like paint and just slobbering everywhere. I'm pulling it flat on the paper to create a nice thin layer of ink on my brush so I'm not over inking. If you over ink and get inside of your small details, you'll lose those details because they're full of ink. And especially if you press too hard as you press your plate onto your paper, you'll end up pulling that ink out of those small cracks and you'll lose some of your detail. And specifically with my particular design, I had a lot of small detail, which was pretty crazy on my part to add such small detail within my design. But I'm optimistic that it'll turn out. Last bit of inking. There we go, and let's proof print it. Trying to use pages that are next to each other while this one dries. I can have this one drying as well. As you guys can see, my artwork first attempt to transfer the image onto the rubber didn't turn out as well as I would have liked. So I happen to know right where my design is because I had screwed up my first transfer so I can see my image. So I know I really need to concentrate on pushing the ink down on the top and the bottom, and then of course wherever my artwork is. Let's see if print number 2 turned out. Hey! As we can see, I didn't reverse my letters, so all of my words are backwards. As I said with the signature stamp, I stressed not forgetting to transfer your words backwards. I did not, and mine ended up printing backwards. Although I have to say for a second print, it's not bad. I can see a little man running, although I don't see his eyeballs or his teeth. I also see the letters, but the letters are butt backwards. Well done, Mr. Lauer.
Printmaking.com.